Hello, my name is Bill Buchanan, and I lead a podcast series in the World Leaders in Cryptography. And I'm so happy to have a true world leader with me today, Aggelos Kiayias. Hi, Aggelos.
Hello, Bill. It's great to
Uh,
be here with you.
Thank you. So, Aggelos is a professor at the University of Edinburgh in the beautiful city of Edinburgh and is a chief science officer at Input Output Global, formerly known as IOHK. He received his PhD in 2002 from the City University of New York. Aggelos is a chair in computer security and privacy and the director of the Blockchain Technology Lab at the University of Edinburgh. In 2021, Aggelos was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, FRSE, and was recently awarded the BCS Lovelace Medal 2024 for his transformative contributions to the theory and practice of cybersecurity and cryptography. He works in areas of blockchain technology and distributed systems, cryptography, e-voting, secure multi-party computation, as well as privacy enhancing identity management. So what's your current role and what does a typical day involve for you?
Yeah. So, well, as you mentioned, and as I'm now in this surroundings. I'm at the office here at Edinburgh University, School of Informatics, which is my center of operations, so to speak. Even though a lot of the work we do is has remote nature, so a lot of the people I work with. As you know, it so happens with a lot of us academics, as you know very well, Bill, it involves people that can be anywhere in the world, and so there's a lot of meetings, like very very similar to the one we have now, in the sense of we're sitting in front of the screen, and we're talking to our computers. But I have to say, compared to the early days, a lot more meetings, a lot more management of people, and which is great, but at the same time, it has its own challenges, like different challenges than cracking a nice open question, let's say, in cryptography or cybersecurity. It's a lot about also facilitating the work of other people, and making it happen so that they excel in what they do. So, but and this happens both at the uni with students, but also in my role as chief scientist that you mentioned at Input Output, with other researchers at the research department of the company.
Excellent. And it's great to see that so many cryptographers seem to have this dual role of being an academic, very important, and also have this industrial link. And I think that's really healthy overall. And to be mentoring both researchers in industry and academia is really quite a unique thing. So, what were your school days like? So let's go back to where were you born? Where did you grow up, and what were your days at school like?
Yeah, I was born in Greece, and that's where basically my family's from, and I grew up in Athens, and I went to school in Athens, and also university in Athens. So I was a mathematician. I was very excited about math, and sort of the short story of this was I loved math, but I always felt that I would like to be able to apply the math I know to problems that matter for society. And at the time, the options to do that seemed to me not very attractive, at least the popular ones. So you could be like a statistician, you could be an actuary, you could be, you could become like a theoretical physicist. There were a few of those directions that seemed popular with other colleagues, let's say at the math department, but none of them were seemed particularly attractive to me. And then someone mentioned to me that cryptology is an area that has a lot of math, and it also involved a lot of number theory, which I absolutely loved as a student, as it was, let's say, one of my topics, as an undergrad, as a graduating student, was on number theory. So I felt actually very, very excited about this because I realized that cryptography is an area where you can solve problems of trust using mathematics. I mean, this blew my mind completely,
Yeah.
like that it's possible to do that. So, and that was back, let's say, in '94. And after that, all my life was about how do I get myself organized so that I could contribute to that area. That's the short story, let's say, of
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
being a student and going
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
cryptography.
Yeah. And so you obviously graduated from school and you did your postgraduate degree in
Yeah,
Greece and then
I
moved
started
to.
in Athens. Yeah, I started in Athens. I started in Athens, and but I realized very soon, that was the mid, basically mid to late '90s in Athens, Greece. That was not a hotspot of cryptography by any means. So I very soon realized that I have to go abroad. But I was lucky in the sense, even though I didn't have this, especially like coming from the math department, there was not like a very strong culture on, going abroad to study. I mean, there was just a little bit of that, but it was more about, it was a little bit more insular, let's say, the way I felt my math department. It was like a bit of like a more orthodox kind of math education where you just study hard and, it was not like, it didn't have like this culture of everybody going abroad to discover new things. But then I had a supervisor who got a post in New York City at the City University, and he said, like, why don't you come with me? And this New York City is a great area for cryptography. There's a lot of cryptographers in New York City, as it was indeed the case. And he said, like, why don't you come with me as I'm taking this appointment? And then once you are in New York City, you're going to work with a lot of people there. So for me, that was one aspect. The second aspect was I started to talk to a lot of computer science students who had a much more outward, perspective in terms of their research, right? So contrary to the math background that I was coming from, the computer science students, they, at least I'm talking about Athens, Greece, right? So of the '90s. So the computer science students, they had really a kind of a global perspective. They really, looked at US, UK, and other places in the world for studying. They were really taking a more global perspective in the way they would want to do research. So this definitely influenced me as I was, closer to, let's say, as I was shifting closer now to computer science from math, and that also propelled me to say, yes, going abroad is the right thing. I'll follow my supervisor in New York City, and then I'll find my way there. And that worked very, very good for me because it was a good time. New York City was a lot of work, but I met a lot of people. I met my main supervisor in cryptography, which was Moti Yang. He
Wow.
was a great researcher in cryptography, still extremely active in the space, and a very nice person, also a person that I could look up to both in terms of as an individual and as a researcher. So this gave me the opportunity to have some very productive years during my PhD studies. Then,
That's great. Yeah. So that was around the start of the 2000s. So it was even before Satoshi Nakamoto created
yeah,
Bitcoin. So it's really taken off since then. So you probably got into it at the right time, just as these things were taking off. So can you tell us a bit
yeah.
about your lab at Edinburgh and why you've made the city of Edinburgh and Scotland your home?
Yeah, so that's obviously a great question because I moved to Edinburgh in 2016, so that's almost now 9 years ago. And uh, I mean, I came to Edinburgh about 15 to 20 years ago for a conference, and I absolutely loved it. Like it was completely unexpected. I didn't know the UK very well. I mean, and obviously, I think a lot of us, when they think the UK, they think about London and perhaps a couple of other places, but Edinburgh was not in my radar, so to speak. And I came here, and I was completely overwhelmed. I mean, that was like, what a beautiful place. It was also like in the summer, the weather was great.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Edinburgh is like fantastic, so green.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you know, uh, and so there are times that Edinburgh could completely, take you away with both in terms of mind and spirit. So I fell in love with it. So I always had it in my mind. I didn't imagine that I would move here at the time, because I was actually I worked in the United States for some time as a professor, and then I moved back to Greece to become a professor there, because I felt always a sort of strong sentiment about contributing back to my home country. And it was a very active period of my life, that between 2008 and 2015, 16, when I moved to Scotland. Of course, a lot of things happened in between. I felt that a lot of things in Greece were not moving the direction I wanted. I wanted to have a global, lead a global research team that has impact, and I was feeling increasingly that Greece could be a limiting environment. Like, I felt about Scotland, I was very positive about Scotland when I realized that, the first of all, Edinburgh University didn't have a very big security department, let's say,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
was very, very keen on growing in that direction. And at the same time, I felt that for me was the right time. So Scotland felt a very nice environment to do that. It's a very, I mean, it's a small country. I mean, let's say comparable to Greece in some ways, in the sense that it's not a big European country in the sense. Of course, Scotland is part of the UK, which is a very big country in Europe. But Scotland also has its, let's say, its own character and its own history, let's say, and its maybe its own cultural identity, its own national identity, perhaps, actually. So um, I really like that in Scotland there is this spirit of innovation, especially in matters of finance and services.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very I think it's a if you look at the size of the country and the impact that it had in the world in the last, let's say, few centuries, it's enormous. And actually, this resonated also from my perspective, because Greece had a similar profile in a way. But of course, the Greece's contribution to the world are much more ancient, and they're
Yeah.
lost, in history. And I would say shared by but by the whole world in a way. So, I mean, Greece, by all means, today is a fantastic country to visit with a lot of history. But, modern Greece still struggles to find its way, as a leader of sorts in some fields. Scotland is also a small country, but it has a lot of potential in being a leader, especially in bespoke specific areas that you can invest, that the country can invest in. So it felt like, because I was really interested in the meantime, I grew this interest in blockchain systems and financial technologies in general. It felt like Scotland would be a great environment to set up a lab. And I mean, of course, the university Edinburgh University is a great university, is a fantastic place to work on. So it seemed to me like a very attractive proposition. I didn't know much about Scotland at the time when I moved, but everything I learned made me feel very positive about it. Edinburgh University seemed a very good environment to that. It has like a global perspective, and that was very much in line with what I wanted to do, and that was something that I felt Greece was not capable of accommodating, despite the fact that I was trying to do that, and I was not unhappy with the way things were working, but the whole environment, especially at the time, thing like it's worth pointing out all the issues. There was like this middle of 2010s crisis. There was the financial crisis of 2008. Greece was very much affected. There was also a point in time where, Greece might have been kicked out of the euro. Didn't happen at the end. But actually, this part of the story is also part of my motivation for working on blockchain technology. I was working on Bitcoin, and maybe I'm going to fast forward a little bit to some of your questions, but I'll just finish in a moment, and perhaps we can pursue that thread further. But what was happening in Greece was also a strong motivation for me to look at proof of stake protocols, because I wanted to make a sort of a national currency for Greece that would work in a bottom-up fashion. The government at the time, we're talking about 2014, something like this, 2015, was thinking about like a top-down approach where they set up a database and then they have this parallel currency, parallel to the euro. I was thinking, is it possible to do like a bottom-up thing where people could use as a currency, but it worked in a bottom-up fashion. Will not come from the top, will not come from the government, but will just come from the people. And then because I was studying Bitcoin for quite some time, I was feeling that Bitcoin is not the right tool for this. Bitcoin is great in a number of ways, but it's not great as as a payment system. It has a lot of features that just make it not the best choice for it. And energy efficiency for me was also a major aspect. So I started to look at proof of stake systems, and basically that motivated me to take a path that eventually was pursued further when I moved to Scotland.
Because obviously the Bank of England is now moving towards the digital pound slowly, but getting there. And obviously there's that debate about whether you want to centralize your currency around the digital pound or a digital dollar, or whether you have a more citizen-focused currencies. What's your feelings on CBDCs, central bank digital currencies? Are they a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, they can be a good thing, but they can also be a bad thing. So as it goes with many instances of these technologies, they are like double-edged swords in many ways. So CBDCs, do make sense to some level. It makes sense that a central bank could offer a medium of exchange that is secured by basically the government. As it is right now, we achieve digital payments using commercial bank money or basically private companies that give you this capability of digital payments. That's great. And there's a lot of very, very, very nice ways to do digital payments, but it's also expensive. Like admittedly, it can be quite expensive to do these digital payments, especially at the cross border level.
Yeah.
At some point, you can look at some of these costs, and they feel like essentially extortion. Like especially for people that are not, they don't have maybe they're not citizens, let's say, of European or US countries, and you can see like some of the fees and that they have to pay to transfer money. Especially immigrants that they want to transfer money cross border. Is just these huge amounts of money that are being spent, that are being given to this basically financial infrastructure to support the transfer of value that people want to do. So central bank digital money, digital currency would definitely help lower some of these costs. So it's very plausible that if you have CBDCs, like you can achieve some type of transfers at lower cost, exactly because the government wants to do this in a cost efficient manner, right? So they commit in most of the cases where CBDCs are discussed, the government says that they will offer this at essentially not substantial, not of any cost, let's say, to the end user, or with costs that basically will be shared. Will be shared by society in general, and I think that makes sense. Like being able to transfer value is, in a way, a right. or is in a way something that, we as a society, we should be able to facilitate. And so I think there is a certain angle that CBDCs make a lot of sense, because paper money and coins, like this is just, well, ancient technology, in today's standards, right? I mean, can we think 20 years down the line or 50 years down the line, we're still gonna have like, we have to be able to do everything online, and we have to make this accessible and inclusive. So that's the good part. Now, the bad part is that there's a way to implement these systems, which is pretty terrible. Like, so, there's like privacy implications, cybersecurity issues. It's just, you look at the current state of cybersecurity and information technology, and it's not great. So there is a way, if we rush forward and we just implement these systems in a way that is not sufficiently robust, not sufficiently privacy preserving, there is a danger that is going to do more damage than good, right? So I think like maybe another thing that you can think as a parallel is like social media, right? So social media is great, like I can connect to my friends, to the family, etc., but they can also be used for, like as a way to spread misinformation, bias public opinion in ways that is in a direction which is not for the public benefit. So I'm just saying, like, again, this is a type of technology that it looks like we rushed forward, as a, let's say, the IT industry, like, including all of us, like we rushed forward, we produced those systems, and it turns out that they were not done in the best possible way, and now we have we have like a lot of disadvantages because of this.
Yeah. And it's like for 50 years, I see 1976 roughly as the kind of start. I know that cryptography happened before then, but I do see the Diffie-Hellman paper as the real foundation. So you think about it, 50 years of working tirelessly to create these protocols, the zero knowledge proofs, the privacy aware. We now have the toolbox to actually do this properly. And I just hope that the Bank of England and other nations don't throw this away. I think the Project Hamilton project was interesting. That had the concept of an unspent hash unit, which would completely anonymize the transactions so that the bank couldn't actually spy on citizens. So it's hoped that hopefully they will be able to create some sort of privacy aware ledger, but you just know that it won't actually happen. The technologists don't get their way, and the economics people find a way around that. So let's wind right back. So your core area just now is in blockchain. So could you give us a very simple explanation of what a blockchain is and why it's so important?
Yeah. So blockchain protocol is a very interesting protocol that enables a set of parties to organize a shared resource in a way that accessing that resource could be a database, let's say. Accessing that resource is hard to disrupt for each one of them individually, and there's no one that controls that resource. So it's a sort of like, it's a distributed protocol. It comes from this long history of building distributed systems, but it adds a pretty remarkable element into it. So if you look at this distributed systems literature until the time of blockchain protocols, all the distributed systems, they operated under the assumption that someone sets the system up at the beginning. So usually the common assumption in the distributed system is that, yes, the system is distributed. Yes, there is no single point of failure. So, you have like a good way to distribute the functionality so that no one controls it, but you still have a setup operation that someone is responsible for, installing, let's say, every node and setting it up in a correct way. And very crucially, what usually you do in this setup operation is that you create cryptographic keys, and then you let everybody else know the keys of everyone else. So you can have like these authenticated channels between each other. Now, this operation is assumed to be basically someone does it, and we trust it. So we basically trust that, let's say, I know your key and you know mine, and that's not something that is to be challenged. And then we can do like all these nice operations, like we can have this distributed database as well, and we get this resilience against faults, even faults that are malicious, that, let's say, hackers have, may create. So what blockchain technology offers on extending this is that it removes this trusted setup operation, which is actually very remarkable. It's not at all obvious how to do it. And the fact of the matter is that before blockchain systems, if you look at the distributed systems literature, this was basically was not a topic of any significant research. So that's like one remarkable aspect of blockchain technology, is that removes this trusted setup. So now you don't need someone to come set up and give you some information that the others know, and you don't need to have keys, let's say, of everybody. Now, this may sound like a technical detail, but it's not. It's actually really, really crucial, because blockchain systems, they are meant to scale globally. And once you go to this global level, it is very unclear who can do the setup to apply the classic distributed system, approach. So, because there's no like global organization that can come and say, oh, I'm going to give, here is the key of this, stakeholder in Japan, and that's the key of the other stakeholder in Europe. So you want to avoid this setup operation, and blockchain systems, solve that problem. So that was particularly exciting. And then the second aspect that is the hallmark of blockchain technology is that it offers incentives for you to run the protocol. So in classic cryptography and distributed systems, incentives are not part of the equation, right? So there are good guys, there are bad guys, and that's it. And nobody asks the question why the good guys do what they do. There's a protocol, and the good guys run the protocol. Why they do that, that's not the question that is to be solved by the protocol. It is to be solved by, let's say, this broader environment that creates and facilitates, the protocol. So, but blockchain technology says no. This question is in scope and has to be solved by the protocol. So the protocol itself is going to incentivize you to follow it. So it's going to incentivize you to be the honest party, as we say in cryptographic protocol design. So that's another really novel feature. So these two fundamental novel, there's a lot of things to say, but if you ask me to cherry pick the two fundamental like elements of blockchain technology that are brought to the blockchain technology brings to the picture of cryptographic protocol design is these two.
That's great, yeah. Obviously you're talking about permissionless ledgers here. In a permission system, there would be a controller, but obviously in that completely distributed infrastructure, you want to go for a permissionless approach. So what are you currently, I know that you've worked on so many things in the past, and you've really kept moving with the latest research and very much understanding the horizon. What the problems that you're currently at this minute working on?
Well, scaling these protocols, as you said, is these protocols, this permissionless protocol in particular, and as you said, is a major thing. I should point out. I think you made a good point about talking about permission versus permissionless protocols. Obviously, my answer when I was thinking of blockchain technology is fundamentally thinking about permissionless protocols, because that's where they were. That's how this technology came into the public eye. Permission protocols is something we knew how to do, decades before the Bitcoin blockchain. Now, This doesn't mean that there was not a lot of innovation that happened the last, decade or 15 years in permission protocols as well. A huge amount of innovation was actually brought forward in the case of permission protocols, and um, and that was actually facilitated by blockchain protocols, by basically protocols like the Bitcoin blockchain and so forth. Um, so so that's another way that the Bitcoin blockchain and the blockchain approach in general, like gave to research and development in the case of permission protocols. So in terms of my research, I have to say it spans very widely that space. But also I would say it looks as it did actually even before 2009, it looks at multi-party cryptography in general. I mean, this was the topic that always inspired me. I mean, I loved cryptography. I loved Alice and Bob, but to me, like for some reason, I always wanted to scale up to a lot of parties. I thought like the multi-party setting is the setting that fascinates me. So I want like Alice, Bob, Charlie, David, Eve, and so forth, like a lot of those, to be present and somehow do stuff, collude with each other, or do all kinds of things. Because ultimately, um, there is a lot of, even though like two-party channels is a amazingly intricate, interesting, and huge chapter, for modern cryptography, as you mentioned, going back to Diffie Hellman. The multi-party setting has its own appeal. Huge number of challenges, is like immensely more challenging, and there's a lot of interesting things to do. That one of them being blockchain technology. We have uncovered, in the last, let's say, 15, 20 years. I mean, traditionally, cryptography was very much focused in this two-party setting for good reason, right? So, and there was a lot of advances that were done in the two-party setting that really mattered in practice as well, right? So, e-commerce, let's say, is all around this, secure communication between the client and the server. Diffie-Hellman key exchange. I mean, this is like really fundamentally a fundamental enabler of a lot of developments in the internet. Starting from the 90s and going forward, this had a huge impact in the development of the modern internet, or the way we use the internet. But I'm interested in general in any type of multi-party cryptographic protocol and now in the recent times, I'm increasingly interested also in the economics and incentives behind the parties that run these protocols. So going beyond this classic honest versus malicious model, and actually thinking why the honest parties are honest, what incentivizes them to be operating in the protocol, and what are the mechanisms that can make certain properties prevail, let's say, at equilibrium.
Yeah, it's amazing because we've obviously got IPFS, which is actually using the Bitcoin network as a back end. So this gives you immutable storage, completely distributed. I think it happened in Turkey before, and we see an uprising just now in Turkey, and I think there's been problems with the social media being switched off and so on. I think the last time that happened, Wikipedia decided to put all of their content on IPFS so that you can't block it with a single firewall and so on. So I think that whole distributed data infrastructure, everything that we have in systems is centralized typically, and it's a single point of failure. DNS is a good example. If the DNS is to fail, it can trip the whole infrastructure. So I think we need to understand resilience. And recently in the UK, we had the Heathrow outage. A single substation brought down one of the largest airports in the world, and that's just a crazy situation. So it's almost like we're living on legacy, and we're still going along with the systems that we've had in the past. We could probably learn a lot from the oil and gas industry, which will typically have failover systems for safety and so on. So we really need, and for some reason, computer science and computing systems seem to live in this other world where we don't have to document things anymore. We don't have to have the failover. So I think that centralization, to go back to your point about multi-party computation, is such a wonderful area to think that you can split computing up into lots of little bits and distribute it, and no one actually knows any part of it. And obviously, Shamir's shares have been around for a while, and we actually start to see Peterson commitments, the verifiable secret shares, Feldman, and so on, where you don't have a dealer. So obviously, the problem is that if Eve is the dealer of secret shares, that's the split of a key, then what happens when the dealer goes evil? And it's amazing when you think the protocols that we could create that would allow us not to ever have a dealer and everything could be fair. It's a great advancement. So that's a great area for you to advance. So do you currently teach? I know that I mean, Edinburgh is a world leading university, and you have a big team there. And I don't know if you have time to do any teaching at
No, I
all.
do.
Do you
I do.
teach?
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. So I was
yeah,
teaching last term. I was teaching last term actually. Just finished. So I'm not teaching in the now in the spring, but I was teaching in the fall. I these days I'm teaching a course I call Blockchains and Distributed Ledgers, which takes a very broad view of blockchain technology. It uses blockchain technology and distributed ledgers as a way to introduce a lot of concepts of cryptography, cybersecurity, as well as multi-party computation to the students. It also has a programming component, so we're doing smart contract programming. I think smart contract programming is both a very nice skill
yeah,
for young students to have today, because there is a growing demand for people to be able to write smart contracts, but also taking into account like how AI, let's say, now streamlines programming, there still remains a very important part of programming, which is the design and analysis of the program itself. And in the case of a smart contract, there's a lot of things that you have to take into account when you deploy a smart contract. I mean, very importantly, errors in the code are very difficult to manage once the contract is deployed and is being used, exactly because it's like you're shipping, your code to outer space. Like, then, especially in the permissionless blockchain paradigm, like it's everywhere. Your code is everywhere. Everybody has a copy and then it's executed and then, the output converges. But, doing any modifications to that code is either not possible, or if it is possible, this opens up your code to a lot of other potential attacks, and issues. So it's sort of like writing code at a very critical for a very critical type of application, and there's a lot of interesting things to take into account when you design contracts, and then analyze how different stakeholders can engage with that code. So there's a lot of creative work, in summary. I mean, in the development of these programming tasks, and I think that in itself is also another rewarding element of using that course to understand, safety critical programming in the curriculum. So I think that's another belief, like sort of lasting. Another element, let's say, of lasting value that students learn by taking a course like that.
that's great. Yeah. And I find I can teach a course in cryptography and then we get to the lab on Ethereum and it becomes alive. And when I do a little survey at the start, so we do it slightly different. We have an applied cryptography course and we keep building it up with all the different methods and we get to tunneling, which brings them all in, and then we get on to blockchain and it almost like brings everything together. In that
Mhm.
lab where a student can send some cryptocurrency to their friend and to become crypto millionaires is amazing. And then to create a smart contract to create an NFT that you can actually say, we could at the end of this module send you your marks cryptographically signed with my public key and with all the details in it. It really brings the whole topic alive, I think. So I think you've done very well to base your whole module around that kind of blockchain smart contract approach.
Yeah. Of course, like I have to say, there's also cryptography, which is being taught separate course,
Yeah,
etc. So, I mean, I have to say, and also Introduction to Modern Cryptography is a course that I've designed when I joined Edinburgh University. There was no course in cryptography before I joined. So that was a course I had the pleasure to bring to the curriculum. Now I'm lucky to have a lot of younger colleagues that are very good cryptographers, and they all like want to teach that cryptography course. So so I had to step down from my favorite course that I was teaching all my
ah,
life.
oh dear.
Um, yeah, I was teaching all my life cryptography. Now I cannot
Yeah,
teach it because I have,
ah,
I have to give it up, to my junior colleagues. But it's also, it's also like a point of joy
yeah,
to have these colleagues that work with me here at Edinburgh that can do such a fantastic job, and I would say better than me, to teach this cryptography course. So so it's a bittersweet, it's a
yeah.
bittersweet thing, not to teach key exchange and all that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a shame. I think that's some of the there was a debate about whether we should teach RSA. I won't go into this debate at all.
I'm happy to
But
do it. Yeah.
yeah, I
I'll
suppose
be happy to go. Yeah,
there's
well, there's a lot
there's
of things to talk about.
yeah, it's a kind of dead end protocol, but it is still very much alive after 48 years or so.
Sure.
But we'll move on. So I think you've made a lot of core contributions around the Bitcoin blockchain protocol. Can you outline some of the advancements that you and your team have made?
Sure, yeah. So going to the Bitcoin blockchain, originally, when I started looking at the protocol, like what was interesting was that a lot of academics, especially fellow cryptographers, but also people out in distributed systems, they were not just seriously looking at this protocol. Like so you had like a lot of enthusiasm from people that were more in the sort of this subculture in cryptography where like there are hackers, like cypherpunks, there was a lot of enthusiasm from that side, but you were not getting enough bandwidth or enough attention from, let's say the more orthodox academic, quote unquote, serious cryptography researchers, like, what's going on here? And that was something that I was very keen to understand. So I spent like quite some time studying how Bitcoin works. And the question I try to answer is, what is the problem? What are the basic properties of the protocol? If you look at it as a protocol, like what is the thing it does, and how does it do that? And how could you prove some of its basic properties? So what we did in this early paper, we call it the Bitcoin backbone, was the development of a theory, of a model and a theory within which you can understand the Bitcoin blockchain, not as a piece of software that does something interesting, but as a protocol in the classic tradition of cryptographic protocols. So in other words, it was also a type of work that would make the protocol accessible to fellow cryptographers so that they could understand and build further. So in that work, we distilled some of the basic properties of the protocol. For example, chain quality was a property that said if you observe the chain and you look at the segment of a chain in the possession of an honest participant of the protocol, and you look at the sequence of blocks on that segment, there's going to be at least one block or at least some blocks that are contributed by honest parties and not the adversary. So that was an analysis of the low-level properties of the protocol that highlighted what it can do. So that's essentially what I just said. The chain quality enables afterwards at a higher level to argue that the protocol cannot be censored. So in other words, this database cannot be censored exactly because the adversary cannot completely drown honest participant contributions. Like there's still going to be some opportunity for the honest participants to contribute to the protocol. And that was something that we proved formally, for example. we had a model in the classic tradition of cryptography and distributed protocols. So that was an early contribution that was well received by the wider cryptography community. But then we went on. I mean, I'm still very active in research in protocols that are in the same space as the Bitcoin blockchain, because there was a lot of open questions. I mean, for example, like one major open question was how fast can you settle in the permissionless setting? So as it is well known, Bitcoin is not very fast in terms of settlement, and for a long time it was believed that that's because in this, completely permissionless setting, you have to do certain things, you have to accept certain things. It's such an environment that fast settlement wouldn't work. So it turns out, let's say, that that's not true, and you can build other protocols, admittedly more elaborate than the Bitcoin blockchain in a number of ways, that they do have fast settlement in the classic understanding of what fast settlement is, which is basically in what sometimes people say constant time. So essentially, you don't have to wait time proportional to a certain security parameter, and then the more you wait, the more certain you are. And that was work that we've done, just last year with one of my PhD students. So just to give an example of work that spans quite a long time and focuses on this permissionless setting that Bitcoin focuses on. On the other hand, like a lot of my other work was in settings like proof of stake, more energy efficient protocols, and protocols that scale better, together with their incentives, which is another big chapter.
Because you've obviously got Bitcoin was a version 1 blockchain. Satoshi just wrote it, and it works very
Yeah.
well. But it obviously wasn't as efficient. It could be the version 2 is obviously the Ethereum with the smart contracts, and the version 3 is more the Tangle IOTA, giving you direct acyclic graphs and so on, where you can almost have an instant consensus, but then becomes the proof of work, the proof of stake problem that you have. If you've got instant consensus, you don't have time to make sure that something is right or not. So I think in 2017 you published, please excuse me for getting the pronunciation of this wrong. So you published the Ouroboros. Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's perfect. Yeah.
Good. So maybe you can tell us where the name came from to proof of stake protocol. Can you tell me what the core contributions of that paper was?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So the question, the core question, the core open question was that could we get a similar decentralization profile for a protocol that doesn't use proof of work and it's energy efficient? So it was believed that that's not possible, that somehow fundamentally this level of decentralization you get in the Bitcoin blockchain is intricately related to proof of work. And I have to say, there's maybe a lot of things to unpack here, but I wouldn't want to go into the details. But the core, let's say, question as a single sentence was, you want a protocol that is similarly decentralized. So basically, it doesn't assume anything about the availability of the parties. So they come and go, they're very transient, but you still want to achieve the same sort of threat model or a similar threat model, but without the proof of work expenditure, and this is where Ouroboros, our protocol, was solving that question. And a little bit about the name. So in order to make it work, you need like this continuous lottery, that in a way the lottery has to determine like this unpredictable schedule of leaders which will contribute to the extension of the ledger, and you want this to be refreshing itself continuously. Otherwise it can be attacked. So the Bitcoin blockchain can achieve this refresh in a relatively straightforward manner because it uses proof of work, and under certain, let's say, reasonable assumptions, you get this like continuous refresh of this lottery that seeds the protocol and enables the ledger to be extended. But it's not clear how to achieve the same in the setting without proof of work. And that's where some of the cryptographic machinery that we used in Ouroboros worked. And if you look at the protocol, it has this cyclical nature that somehow it gives you consensus for a little bit, and that's just as little as it's needed to do some other cryptographic operations that is going to refresh its state. And then the protocol can live again for a little bit longer. And then there's a certain cyclical nature in the way the protocol works, like that kind of like it gets a push forward, it does some cryptographic operation, and then it gives it another breath to go another step forward. So somehow the protocol refreshes its state and moves on to the future, and it can go on indefinitely at the end. So this gave it this somehow cyclical quality that if you look at the Ouroboros symbol, which is an ancient symbol and going back millennia, is a symbol of rebirth and continuous improvement and continuous presence. It's like the snake that eats its own tail. That's actually the meaning of the word Ouroboros in Greek, means the snake eater. Oh, sorry, the tail eater. The tail eater, right? Which is a snake, but is a tail eater. Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I won't ask you who Satoshi Nakamoto
Yeah.
is, because obviously you probably have some suspicions,
Yeah.
but it's still an open question. So let's go on to verifiable e-voting systems. I think you worked on that in the past. Can you outline how a perfect e-voting system would look like if the UK eventually moved to a digital system and had some sort of because it doesn't have to be online voting and through mobile
Yeah.
devices. You can still do it through trusted polling stations and so on. So what to you would look like a perfect cryptographic infrastructure for e-voting?
Yeah, that's a great question, first of all, because I think that's a fantastic problem to work on. I was always fascinated by e-voting. So to me, what is a fascinating question, and a question I spent quite a lot of time working on, and not just in e-voting, but also in secure multiparty computation in general, where you can think e-voting being a special instance of, is the question of, can you verify the integrity of the output? So the moment you have a machine that says that's the output of your computation, so basically it says I received all the inputs and that's the output. The question is, to what degree, what level of assurance do you have that the output is correct and that the output includes all the inputs that it's supposed to include? Now, this is a question for any type of computation that involves a computer, or basically any type of computation in general. And I think a good evolving system, but more broadly, a good system that is critical from a security viewpoint, is a system that enables the end user to get some good assurances about the integrity of the output. So a lot of the work I've done on the topic of e-voting was asking the question, what kind of features or characteristics should the system have to facilitate an end user challenging the system about the integrity of the outcome? I think that's, it's a really difficult question. And maybe just to say in one sentence, one of the reasons it's being difficult is that you still want to achieve that, you can call it verifiability property. You still want to achieve this verifiability property while preserving properties like privacy and confidentiality, right? And that's what makes it difficult, right? So if everything is public, then of course the issue of verifiability and integrity is a little bit easier, because, well, it's all public data, so perhaps I can just calculate the outcome myself and be convinced, assuming I have enough time. But of course you understand that once we have also private data, then it becomes immensely harder to build systems that can be convincing in terms of the output, because if the inputs are hidden, Okay, and then someone tells you, a computer comes and tells you, you know, I did like some cryptographic operations, and well, the outcome is 42. Okay, and you know what can you do about this? Like now you want to be convinced, let's say, that you know all the relevant constituent inputs were included, and indeed, you know, 42 is the right outcome. But the question is, how do you facilitate that sort of interrogation, if you want, if needed?
Yeah. And there's obviously been work in partial homomorphic encryption using the traditional discrete logs and elliptic curves, and now we see lattices coming along, giving us the opportunity of full homomorphic encryption. So it's not quite there yet, but I see the community really moving heavily. We use OpenFHE a lot, which they have some great advancements. I think it's run by a team from Duality, opening
Hmm.
up they could keep this code closed. And I think Microsoft did work on Seal, and it's kind of died a death, really. It's almost
Hmm.
2 years since they've touched it. But it's great to see the OpenFHE community really opening up and providing the libraries in Python. I could never believe that Python would be able to support homomorphic encryption, but it looks like they're doing it, and they're doing it with machine learning too. I think there are models of using SVM in neural networks now with these lattice methods. So obviously that might give us the opportunity for processing in a more public way. So I think you also looked at traceable signatures. Can you outline how they're actually used and what their core application is?
Yeah, so there's things like traceable signatures, group signatures, and other related ones that or ring signatures, let's say that I worked on. I mean, these are all like sort of you can call them privacy enhancing primitives. They live in this world of credentials. How do I establish, you know, a certain aspect of my identity? And the question that was really interesting to me was. Um, that you know privacy is great, but if the system gives you complete privacy, like complete anonymity, then it's bound not to be sufficient to actually protect the privacy of people, because complete anonymity is undesirable for many reasons. I mean, for one thing, it can facilitate attacks and misbehavior. So if you use a purely anonymous system, you're likely going to get it banned from, you know, most applications. I mean, exactly because those applications that want to you know, facilitate access, they want some assurances that the attackers uh, will not access them. So if you give like a purely anonymous system, uh, it's going to be the case that its impact might be limited. So the question is, could we temper anonymity with characteristics or cryptographic functions that make it possible to audit or make compliant the system operation without breaking privacy for the honest participants, but making it the case that whenever the system has to, let's say, trace or identify a certain source of misbehavior, then the system is capable of facilitating that. So traceable signatures is an example of that, of such a work that basically says that it's possible for a certain distributed entity to issue a piece of identifying information, and then the path of a certain entity in this otherwise anonymous pool of identifications can be identified. So I can trace, let's say, a transaction or a sequence of the transactions of a certain individual. It can be traced if this distributed entity gets an injunction and then it's decided that that entity has to be traced. So it's essentially a way to provide conditional anonymity so that these privacy enhanced systems could actually, you can call them, become more compliant with what we expect for real world systems to be, right? So they have to comply to both, let's say, traceability, identification, things like in financial technology, we talk about KYC and AML. So how do you facilitate things like this and make them compatible with privacy? So traceable signatures is an example of how you can marry the two, let's say.
That was an excellent explanation. I really do understand because the other side is the Monero Zcash, which is scary. I think Jan Kamenisch worked on a lot
Yeah.
of this work when he was at
Yeah.
IBM on having traceable logs that are anonymized, but maybe the citizen can actually see them. So you're completely correct that we need traceability, and sometimes we need it because of the privacy aware method that we need to actually have some way of setting up an address that the other person can actually connect to. So you've worked a great deal in proof of work systems, and obviously it's the Achilles heel of Bitcoin. It works very well. Do you think that all the problems have been addressed in that area? And if not, what needs to be worked on?
Well, no, first of all, not all problems have been addressed. I think there's a fantastic sub area which I've done already some research on, but I would like to, advocate for. And this is what we call proofs of useful work. So a very nice open question in the case of Bitcoin and permissionless protocols is that yes, they use proof of work in a way to make the system, the setup of the system more transparent, because that's a characteristic of proof of work that you don't get it, let's say, with proof of stake. So by transparent, I mean, in the case of proof of work, you can set up the system in a completely public, transparent fashion. So you can just refer to a public, random string or a public unpredictable string, and that's all you need to bootstrap the whole system. Um, so that's actually a very nice feature from a security perspective. Unfortunately, the energy expenditure then that ensures is just terrible. So there is a question that's been like a really long open question in the blockchain space for permissionless protocols. Is that could we repurpose the energy expenditure for something that we actually want to do? Because the Bitcoin proof of work is actually useless aside of what the protocol does, right? So it's not like you can take this hash computations that Bitcoin does and repurpose them for, I don't know, training an AI model, or doing something else, like, or solving some scheduling problem which is difficult, and or doing protein folding, or there are intensive computational tasks that we want to do, right? So these are things we want to spend energy to do, right? Because we see a lasting value in performing these type of computations, because we will solve some important questions. So there was always this it's like a small line of work in the blockchain space that asks the question: could we use this uh, effort, this energy which is spent for consensus, and also do something that is actually useful otherwise? And this was actually a very difficult question, because once you go into that territory, you open up yourself to a potential attack in the consensus protocol, where somehow the adversary could poison the list of problems that you're solving with perhaps pre-solved or easy problems that then the adversary can use to break the underlying protocol and the consensus protocol, I mean. So it's a really interesting question how to do that, and that's something that we've already done some research. So there are some very positive results that we published at Crypto a couple of years ago. Essentially, the first proof of useful work protocol that we could prove that it works under reasonable assumptions, and we could also quantify how useful the computation that it does is. But I would consider still that this was just the first step in that direction, and I think that this is still a wide open space for more work here, and I think that would be something that would be very interesting on the proof of work direction, because if that works, that would remove this criticism for Bitcoin that we actually spend energy for nothing. Then if we have a good proof of useful work protocol, we could actually do things that we want to do, like, again, computationally intensive tasks like protein folding, but then also get the consensus protocol as a side effect. So that would be something quite nice to have.
Yeah, because obviously the Bitcoin protocol requires a hash value that has a number of zeros, and we keep increasing the number of zeros. And it's a
Yeah.
crazy challenge because it needs a whole lot of GPUs across the world to be racing towards finding if they're very lucky, this hash value. And obviously,
Yeah.
we're going to run out of Bitcoins, and so there won't be any more rewards left. So we're almost like getting to this window that we need to find something that will flip over. But it's
Mm.
worked. I mean, it's worked so well, and it's difficult to move away. Well, you can't move away from it because it's working. So there are areas that are difficult in computer science, and one is the proof of deletion. So GDPR says I've got the rights to demand that Google removes my data. So I
Mm.
want Google to prove to me cryptographically that they have deleted my data, which isn't an easy task. Someone can say that they did a remove from the file system, anything with my data, but is it still in the memory? Is it still in the backups? Is it still remnant somewhere? It's a really difficult problem to actually have. And I think you worked on a proof of burn, which I assume
Mhm.
is a similar type of problem in a blockchain type world. Can you tell me what that is and where it can be used?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I should say that I've also worked in proof of deletion itself. I think it's a fantastic problem. Like we call it the proof of secure erasure. It's a very nice, it's a very nice problem in its own right. It's very hard to solve and cannot be solved in a general setting. But it's something actually that in certain settings you can solve. Like and maybe just this is something I worked maybe 10 years ago. But I think still it's a fascinating area of work. So proof of secure erasure is something that you can do against a device that has limited memory. And the question is, can I send a very short message to a device that and then have it compute something that is very space inefficient? So it's going to blow up in its memory. And then if it gives me the correct answer, I know it kind of killed its own memory because the computation I'm asking to do like explodes in terms of memory. So that's like a similar, like you can think of it as a not as a proof of work, but as a proof of space. So essentially, it's something that I'm giving it to you, and it's short, but it's going to explode as you compute it in your mind, and then it's going to occupy so much of your memory that you cannot keep other things. So that's kind of the proof of secure erasure, which is, I would still say, a great and interesting area of research. Also giving now to what's called proof of space and other related protocols. But the proof of burn itself is a more narrow, specific topic that makes sense in the context of the blockchain protocol and asks the question: is it possible to provably burn a coin? And in many cases, this is a useful thing that someone may want to do. And the important aspect here is that it's not just that you want to burn a coin, but you want to do it in a publicly verifiable manner. So in other words, I should burn a coin and then prove to you that I did it, and you will be convinced that that coin is not recoverable. So I don't have, let's say, any trapdoor in my in my sleeve that after you're convinced, suddenly the coin comes back into circulation, right? So the key point is that I want to do this proof of burn, and I want to do it in a provable, publicly verifiable fashion. And that was the question that our proof of burn paper had addressed, like basically formalizing this as a cryptographic primitive and solving it.
That's great. I think I've scratched the surface with your career, and I'd be really
Mm.
keen to speak with you again in more detail. So I've just got one last question, and that's what the next decade looks like in cryptography and blockchain.
Oh, well, that's a that's a great question to finish. Boom. So, well, I have to say it's going to be great. I mean, the time has come, first of all, for multi-party cryptographic protocols to have a huge impact. We already see that with blockchain, but secure multi-party computation is coming. There is a ton of interesting things that we will see being implemented. Zero knowledge proofs are going to make a huge difference in deploying these protocols at scale. I'm actually just looking back, like you can say Diffie-Hellman protocol was developed in the 70s, and let's say by middle of 90s, we already were using it meaningfully in applications and in commerce. Like, so there were a ton of systems that suddenly were really using the technology. I think now the time has come for secure MPC and zero knowledge to have a similar path. So in the next decade or so, we will see a lot of these protocols and systems becoming part of the basic infrastructure in a way that it's going to be there and you don't have to think about them. Like a lot of people talk about blockchain, zero knowledge, or homomorphic encryption. These are just, people will not even realize that they use it, exactly as it is now with key exchange, right? Everybody uses the Hellman key exchange or RSA, etc. But nobody cared. I mean, you just people do what they want to do, and they do it safely. And that's exactly because these protocols are there. And I expect that it's going to be similar with a lot of these protocols like homomorphic encryption and zero knowledge and secure multiparty computation are gonna be used very, very, very widely, become an integral part of our cyber infrastructure, and they will just make IT systems much more resilient and robust. So that's one aspect. But if you want, like, for more fundamental research, I see a lot of opportunity in quantum and post-quantum techniques. So on the one hand, everything I said, it has to be viewed from the lens of a potential quantum adversary, which is conceivable that we will see it in the next decade. So there are a lot of developments in the quantum computation space that suggest that it might be feasible to have quantum adversaries in 10 years, irrespective of whether this is going to happen or not. Post-quantum security is something that seriously should be considered by all systems that want to be sustainable. And of course, blockchain systems are, the right candidates for this, because they aspire to be resilient to all types of attacks for a long period of time in the future. So, of course, they have to consider post-quantum security. But then it's also research that has to do with using quantum devices for enhancing the security of systems. And there's a lot of opportunity, because the quantum computational model offers things that are classically impossible. So what we were talking about before about secure erasure, which, it's an almost unthinkable problem, like that maybe you can achieve it in certain limited conditions when, like I was saying before, like a limited device that is otherwise isolated. But once you go to quantum computing, like you can achieve things that are impossible to do classically, and secure erasure, as implied by basically results like the no-cloning theorem in quantum mechanics are feasible. And it's even, you can achieve secure erasure even if the entity that runs the computation does not want to erase the state. So you can even achieve it at that level. And this actually opens up a lot of applications in financial technology as well. You can achieve things like quantum money, a quantum transfer of payments with security, which is unthinkable with classical computers. So I see a lot of opportunity for research and development in that direction as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, it opens up, we're limited with Moore's law, but quantum will take us to another area, and we need to start to build that now. And I think you talked about one-shot signatures in
Yeah.
quantum, which is something we can't do classically, and that opportunity in a quantum machine to actually create a signature that actually you can't, you don't have the keys back is really an amazing opportunity. So I'd say to any early career researchers and PhD students to really think about quantum as an opportunity, even just to implement classical methods on a quantum device. I mean, I find it amazing that you can implement an S box, an AES on a quantum machine. It just blows my mind that these ones and zeros in silicon now become qubits and things. The opportunities are great. And I think industry needs to really look at these methods. And obviously post-quantum cryptography is going to be a big area. The NCSE have said that we have about 10 years to migrate, and we need to be starting to build a crypto bill of materials for our organizations. We need to be set up scanners and so on. That's going to be a big area. So thank you very much. It's been a real privilege, and I'm sorry I took a little bit more of your time, and I'd love to speak to you sometime in the future, especially in the quantum area. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. The pleasure was all mine. Always a pleasure to talk with you. Bye.
Okay, thanks.